Simmons brings you a roundup of news and views from across the capital in Politics London.
Hello and welcome to Politics London. Coming up, with Labour's remarkable landslide victory making significant gains in the capital, what does it all mean for Londoners? Thanks for joining us. Hello, good morning. I'm Samantha Simmons. Joining us for the show is a very distinguished panel. Seema Malhotra, Labour MP for Feltham and Heston, who has held shadow ministerial roles at Work and Pensions, Business and Education. Sarah Olney, the Lib Dem MP for Richmond Park, whose briefs have included the Treasury, Transport and Business. Sir Bob Neill, former Conservative MP for Bromley and Chislehurst, who has been Minister for London, Deputy Chair of the Conservative Party and Chair of the Justice Select Committee. And last but certainly not least, Tony Travers from the London School of Economics. So all bases covered. And as ever, if you want to join in the conversation at home, you can reach us on social media at BBC London News. Well, 48 hours on, with the dust settling on the general election results. Let's get your reaction. Seema, to you first. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. I think it has been an extraordinary election. And what I feel very strongly is there's a strong sense of hope and optimism for what Britain can now become, that we've seen now an end to the chaos. And people have put their trust in a changed Labour Party. We've seen that in the increase in seats that we've had in London. But I think what's so important for London as well is that we will now have a Labour government working with a Labour mayor on those missions, tackling our NHS wait list, increasing our police and making sure that actually we've got the public services being supported again.
And we'll talk about all of those issues coming up in the programme. Bob, to you, a dismal night for the Conservatives. Was it worse than you feared?
Mixed. I mean, certainly you would have hoped for better. I think we realised that this election was going to be an uphill struggle, perhaps even before Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, in fairness. I think the rot had set in long before that because of some of his predecessors, to be honest with you. In outer London, actually, I was relieved to see, for example, my old seat in Bromley and what's now Bromley and Biggin Hill, with the change boundaries being held by the Conservatives and some other outer London seats. And that may be a feature just worth bearing in mind, because actually, just to pick up Seema's point, I think it's a concern in some parts of outer London that a Labour mayor and a Labour government don't understand the outer London suburbs, like my area. And that's going to be a challenge for them to demonstrate that they can take on board the concerns of outer London residents. Still have concerns over things like ULEZ expansion and so on. But that said, obviously, for the country's sake, we've got to wish any new government well, whatever the picture. But there are challenges, and things are never as simple, I think the Labour Party will find out, as might first seem.
OK, and Sarah, a fantastic night for the Liberal Democrats. We've spoken to you several times over the last few weeks. It couldn't have gone better, could it?
No, honestly, our final total, we've got 72 MPs, and that will be the largest number of Liberal Democrats ever, and the largest number of, since the Liberal Party, I think, in 1924. So we are absolutely delighted. It massively outstrips our expectations, so we are really, really pleased.
OK, well, let's just take a moment to remind ourselves of the seismic events of Thursday night and Friday morning. Here's BBC London's political correspondent Carl Mercer.
It happened here, and here, and here, and in plenty of other places across the capital. Labour, already dominant in London, strengthened its grip, now with 59 of the capital's 75 seats, and the London MP as the new Prime Minister to boot, winning in places like Westminster for the first time.
I'm Rachel Blake and I'm Cities of London and Westminster MP.
How does it feel to say that?
That's the first time I've said it, so I take the responsibility very seriously, so I'm very happy. It's been an incredible campaign and it's been a really exciting night for Labour.
And it now falls to me, as your MP.
There were victories too in the 3 Barnet seats in Hendon, Chipping Barnet and Finchley and Golders Green.
I cannot wait to get to work. There is so much work that needs doing. We need to bring down crime rates. We need to deliver more affordable housing for families in this constituency. We need to deliver better mental health services, more special educational needs. These are the issues that are going to be my priorities because they are the residents' priorities.
Wins too in the former Conservative heartlands of Beckenham and Bexley Heath. It didn't go all their own way. Their former leader, Jeremy Corbyn, winning easily in Islington North, where he's been the MP for more than 40 years.
I couldn't be more proud of my constituency than I am tonight. I'm proud of our team that brought this result. Thank you very much, Islington North, for the result that we've achieved tonight. Thank you.
For the Conservatives, it was their worst ever election result in London, winning just 9 seats. Former Minister for London, Greg Hands, among those to lose out in Chelsea and Fulham.
17,281.
Their former leader, Ian Duncan Smith, did, though, hold on in Chingford and Woodford Green, despite many of his colleagues losing their jobs.
Why do you think Conservatives aren't connecting with Londoners?
Well, I think the trouble is we've forgotten about working for people in the communities. I've worked relentlessly for people here. My record of success, from getting a new hospital built right the way through to getting rid of antisocial behaviour, fighting about the closure of the Broadmead Road Bridge, these are everyday issues for people here, and it's important therefore that people, MPs, focus on that.
The impression given that you are abandoning your core voters.
And their winning candidate in Orpington suggested a former leader could perhaps return.
I think Boris adds a lot of colour. I think he adds a lot of optimism. And I think if he chose to try to make a comeback, he'd be very welcome in many quarters.
For the Lib Dems, a return to former glories, winning 3 seats from the Tories in South West London, including in Wimbledon for the first time, taking their total to 6 in the capital.
What I remember is losing in 2019. That's the thing I remember, and that spurred us on for 5 years.
Well, I'm from a very working class background. Dad's a scaffolder, mum's a cleaner. Grew up in a council house. They're still council tenants to this day, and I don't see enough of that in politics. I think the public don't see enough of that in politics as well, and I feel like I want to go in there and be a voice for families like mine.
For Labour then, the challenge now is delivery. It's as strong in London as it has ever been and has a national government with a huge majority.
Well, Tony, what are your reflections on the results? Are they pretty much as predictions of the polls predicted?
They're not. I mean, the polls got it broadly right. Some of them had a much worse position for the Conservatives. I think the Conservatives, if you'd offered them 121 seats the day before the election, some Conservatives would have banked that. So the result, though bad for the Conservatives, isn't as bad as some of the polls were suggesting. But if you look at the London results, in fact, the Conservatives, though their vote share fell, it didn't fall as badly as in other parts of the country, and Labour's vote share almost certainly fell in London. So the position between Conservatives and Labour is actually slightly, and I stress slightly, less bad for the Conservatives in London than the rest of the country. For the Liberal Democrats, it was a very good result. I think it's the largest haul of seats certainly since the Liberal Democrats existed. So if you add it all together, it's still complex, and of course for Labour they suffered from losing votes because of Palestine in some parts of the city, and the Conservatives of course now face reform, so there's a lot of further analysis to be done about what this means in the longer term for the major parties. One other thing for the Conservatives, they really do need to find ways of winning younger voters again. There's a real problem for the Conservatives amongst the young.
OK, well, Bob, what are your thoughts on where the Conservative Party went wrong? Just 9 seats secured for your party in London, all in inner London. I'm sorry, none in inner London, all in outer London. Where do you think the issue, what do you think the issues are? Where do you think the party went wrong in failing? Was it failing to appeal to younger voters?
I think that is an important part of it, and a really important part of what we need to do as we reflect for the future. Because I take the view that we shouldn't rush into anything now. This was a serious rebuff from the British public. We have to be humble about that, to recognise that where we have failed, and we therefore need to think and analyse carefully what's the right route forward. I'm firmly of the view that that's not moving further and further to more populist measures or to any extreme of politics. You win in the centre ground, and the Conservatives have to find ways of restoring faith in that centre ground. I think, as Tony has pointed out in the media before, that's about being centrist, It's about being relevant to the key issues, and that's where young people come into it. And housing is going to be really critical on that, giving some aspiration, some hope for young people to get on the housing ladder. But it's also about economic competence. That's back to my point I made earlier, that our reputation for economic competence was damaged before Rishi Sunak ever became Prime Minister. He did his best to restore it, in my judgment, but the harm was done in advance of that. And also, respect for playing by the rules and respect for institutions, which is a traditional Conservative view. I think that's what we've got to try and do.
Seema, Labour won 59 out of a possible 75 seats, an incredible result. But as Tony was saying there, the vote share actually fell for Labour. Are you concerned by that?
The vote share fell, but I think what's important is that there were more complex factors there. I also know from a number of seats I went to that people also felt that Labour had already won. So there was a lower turnout overall and across the country. I think what is important from listening to people across London and across the country is that the reason why people were putting their trust in Labour is because our manifesto, our first steps, whether that is around the NHS wait list or it is around tackling the cost of living or it is around affordable housing or more teachers in our schools, these were the issues that people were talking about. And we have done a lot of work over the last few years under Keir Starmer about understanding what the issues are across the country and how our manifesto will respond to those priorities. I think this is an issue for politics because it also does demonstrate that when we talked about the Conservative Party being out of touch with the British people and not focused on the country and focused on their party, that clearly was the verdict of the British people last Thursday.
Sarah, the Lib Dems secured a huge number of seats, as you mentioned, 6 more in the capital. Was this about your campaign and a positive message, or was this about disaffection with the Conservative Party?
I mean, there's no doubt that voters are, sick to death of the Conservative Party. They've completely lost trust in the outgoing Conservative government. It is around issues, as Bob was saying, about economic competence, but also the way they conducted themselves. But I would say certainly that our gains in the capital in particular, and it was lovely to see Paul and Bobby on your recording there, both of them have worked incredibly hard in their seats over a number of years. They're both local councillors, so they really know and really understand their communities. And I think people were responding to the opportunity to have a local champion speaking up for them in Parliament who really, really gets their
interesting on the
area.
geography, because all the seats in the southwest of London. Why? What is it specifically about those voters that you appeal to them about?
Dare I say it's the best bit of London, but it is.
I think you'll be brave to say it.
But it is. I think it is partly because we've been competitive in places like Kingston and Richmond for a long time, and that's obviously people can see the difference that having a Liberal Democrat MP can make, and that's something that we've been able to share out.
Tony, within hours of winning the election, the Prime Minister was pictured with the London Mayor Sadiq Khan. We've long heard Sadiq Khan argue that he's been hamstrung by a Conservative government. What difference is it going to make now that we have a Labour government to him and to what he can effectively do as London's mayor?
Well, certainly it's going to be, at least initially, a much better relationship. It was a scratchy relationship between Sadiq Khan and the Conservative government, both ways in many terms. So I think we'll see an alignment, but there'll be challenges. So let's just take one or two. Planning. The Labour Party said it's going to sort of liberalise planning to get more built, and then that raises the question of the green belt, and Sadiq Khan's always been very protective of the green belt. Then there's the railways, and particularly what happens to the future of the commuter railway. I think it could be brought into Transport for London, but I'm not sure the Labour front bench sees that as that easy. Then there's the issue that all parties have to deal with, which is crime, law and order. You heard it in the video there. And of course, it's not just more police officers, it requires more than that. So, whether Sadiq Khan will be able to get a substantial increase in terms of resources, I doubt it, because the cupboard is bare. The trouble is there's no extra money for anything. But the tone will be better for a while, for certain. I say for a while, it'll mature and then it'll become its own relationship. And there are lots of other mayors, of course, around the country who'll be Labour mayors who'll be expecting the same kind of improvement.
Bob, you mentioned that the Conservatives need to regroup and think about the future for themselves in London. How much of a threat do you see reform as being? You said they need to move to the centre ground. Do you see a specific threat from them for the Conservatives in London?
I think generally reform had less impact and have got less traction in London than most other parts of the country, and I'm delighted about that. Because I certainly don't take the view that reform are people that should be embraced by the Conservatives. Nigel Farage and people like that have been enemies of the Conservative Party from day one. But we do need to address the concerns that led legitimately for some voters to turn their backs upon my party and in some instances move to reform. That's different. That's why.
And is immigration one of those?
Immigration is one of those, but that has to be done in a sensible and clear and workable fashion. And so we need to think about that. I think crime and the whole issue of safety is another one of those issues. But again, there's not a simplistic knee-jerk reaction to that. That's the point I'm saying to my party. Do not have knee-jerk reactions.
But some of your colleagues do think they should be moving towards the same territory as reform, don't they?
Yeah, and I think that, frankly, is a mistake for two reasons. It's, firstly, I think, not borne out by history. That you get electoral success by moving to the limbs of politics. You win when you're in the centre ground. That applies to both Conservatives and Labour governments over the years. And secondly, remember, as well as losing votes to reform, we lost a lot of seats in the home counties, the areas immediately around London, to Sarah's party, to the Liberal Democrats. A lot of middle of the road, often professional, successful business people were turned off by some of the more right-wing, I have to say, rhetoric of some of my colleagues. We're not going to get those votes back by embracing reform and being reform light.
Very briefly, would you like to see a return of Boris Johnson? Murmurings around that?
I don't think it's sensible in politics to go backwards. We need to move forwards.
Seema, let me ask you about one comment. This is from former Tory Minister for London, Greg Hands, who lost his seat in this election. He warned prior to the election that actually having a Labour government, a Labour mayoralty, a Labour council was actually also perhaps going to be a threat to possibly even democracy. It would dilute scrutiny and accountability for Londoners. How will you make sure that doesn't happen?
I think there's much more reason to be optimistic than what Tony was saying, and the reason why this is focused on the British people and the needs, and also for Londoners in terms of what we can achieve together. With Sadiq and a Labour mayor that are working closely, that's aligned in terms of values, in terms of priorities.
Specifically about scrutiny and accountability. If you don't have that, opposition party to do that, who will?
I think we've also got a lot of maturity in the Labour Party in terms of knowing that there will be sometimes negotiations to have, and that's part of what the Labour Party will be wanting to see, because devolution and devolving power is part of what we believe in. But I think if I can just make this point about Sadiq and the government, Sadiq will not be having one hand tied behind his back in dealing with police and crime, in trying to have affordable housing and tackling
those issues in just a moment, because as Labour rolls up its sleeves and gets to work, let's look at what Londoners are hoping for from this new government. Helen Drew has been out to hear from the experts what they want to see from this Labour government.
Housing, crime and the cost of living. 3 issues that will require big solutions from the new Labour government.
With London regularly voted one of the most expensive cities in the world, the cost of living here is something they'll need to address.
But just how might they do that?
We know that they plan to address poverty by making work pay and getting Britain productive and growing again, and that is very welcome. I would also encourage them to revisit their historic resistance to keeping the 2-child benefit cap in place. We know that lifting that 2-child cap could lift millions of people out of poverty overnight, and making work pay and getting London and Britain growing again is a longer-term effort. When London does well, the rest of the country does well too. We know that 1 in every £4 that the Treasury gets comes from London, despite only 15% of the population living here.
Poverty levels and struggles with the cost of living can often be linked to a rising crime. Here in London, some crime has increased, including shoplifting in certain boroughs and knife crime.
There needs to be more of a focus on neighbourhood policing. Over the past 14 years, because of the cuts, the police have moved towards a responsive policing model where people only see the police when they jump out of the cars after a 999 call. This really doesn't make people feel safe. what makes them feel safe is seeing police out on the streets, building relationships with the local community. I think one of the big issues for me in doing some of my research and evaluation for local authorities is the amount of violence against women. Some local authorities are assessing women's violence every single day. And one local authority in North London, so they have 1,500 survivors of violence against women, but only enough funding to support less than 90 of them.
Not forgetting housing, an issue which the capital has struggled with for decades.
Keir Starmer and his government were elected on a mandate of change. And with 84,000 children who are homeless and living in temporary accommodation in London alone, that change must start with really tackling the housing emergency head on. They need to do two things very swiftly. The first is really supercharging their building of the 90,000 social homes a year for 10 years that we know are needed. And the second is to urgently bring forward legislation to make private renting more secure and more affordable.
Big promises are always made during an election. Now it's over, it'll be a question of which policies the new government prioritises and whether those policies will help London.
Well, Seema, picking up on housing there, 84,000 children in London in temporary accommodation. It's shocking. What are your government going to do about it?
Well, it is shocking, and it is an extraordinary record from the Conservatives. What we know needs to happen is the building of affordable homes across London and across the country. And Sadiq Khan has had a very strong record in terms of building more council homes.
It's been criticised continually for years about not enough.
And completions. Actually, a greater amount of home building has gone on under Sadiq than previous mayors. I think what is so important is that we have a national government working in partnership with our mayors and across the country. And this is because we need more affordable homes for families, for our police to be able to live in London.
But what specifically is going to happen in the next 12 months, for example?
Exactly. Well, this is why we've talked about reform of the planning system so that we can get decisions made more quickly. This is why we've talked about supporting.
And how quickly can that happen?
Well, I hope that we'll be able to move quite quickly on that. And this is why Rachel Reeves and the work the work the team's been doing on infrastructure development. It's all about making sure that we have that infrastructure of opportunity. And I hope that as soon as we can, we'll be getting those changes made.
Bob, renters' rights mentioned there, the renters' reform bill. I mean, it was all in place. It's an easy win for this government. Is it ready to go? Could the government just implement that?
I think there's a number of things that were in process that the Conservative government had brought in, which I hope Labour will pick up and run with. That's one of them. I see no reason why it shouldn't be capable of being brought forward. There's another one in relation to sentencing. For example, I was particularly keen to see as chair of the Justice Committee, that I hope they'll pick up and run with too. I think on housing,
is it as simple as that though? Can they, are they ready made?
Well, I think it's a matter of political will and where the priorities are, isn't it? Because the key thing that matters in all of this is the political determination to make those changes. The planning system, something I had to deal with when I was a minister, is certainly in need of reform, but it's not simple. That's the thing. You've got to look at the legal underpinnings, the legal framework for that, the judicial review system, and so on.
The number of planners, which is
also true. Something I've always argued for when I was chair.
Quite a lot to get through, so I'm just going to ask Tony. We've heard a lot on this programme previously about levelling up and how London often misses out compared to other parts of the country. Do you think that has been the case? Are you going to see that change now, do you think?
I suspect the previous approach to levelling up, which was well intentioned but hadn't delivered the kind of changes that the previous government had hoped in terms of helping other parts of the country grow faster to get nearer London and the southeast levels of output and productivity. I suspect that the government will want to carry on with that kind of policy, but there are plenty of people and places in London who need levelling up, and it should never have been a matter of either or. It will need to be both.
Okay. Sarah, you were formerly a Lib Dem spokesperson for the Treasury. What would you like to see being done? What pressure can you exert when it comes to levelling up now? You have 6 MPs in London.
Well, I mean, all of these issues are things that very much affect constituents. I mean, we've had issues with transport, particularly Hammersmith Bridge, and with policing. And I welcome the fact that we may be able to take away some of the political conflict that has, prevented solutions to some of these issues. But there's no doubt that there's a lot more, I think, that the Mayor could be doing. There are 2 major housing developments in my constituency that have been in the pipeline for the entire time that I have been the Member of Parliament for Richmond Park, and it's because the Mayor has called them in and then has sat on them. And it's not just that it's preventing my constituents from accessing better housing, but the disruption and the uncertainty that it causes as long as these developments are in the pipeline. So I really, really hope, and this is what I will absolutely be pushing for, starting tomorrow when when Parliament gets going, Tuesday rather, you promised change. Let's see that change. That's what my constituents are looking for.
Seema, I want to ask you about the Muslim vote. There's concerns from some in the party that there was a decline in the Labour vote from some in the Muslim population. Labour's vote down on average by 23 points in seats where 20% or more of the population identify as Muslim, and certain MPs certainly suffered from that, didn't they? And this is all around the Gaza policy of the now Labour government. Are you concerned by that?
One of the things Keir said at the very beginning was that we are there to work with and for those who voted for us and those who did not vote for us. And we recognise that this has been a concern over the Gaza vote. But I also think that the moves that we have made in the Labour Party, the calls for an immediate ceasefire, the calls for a two-state solution, the calls for more international aid and a plan for the rebuilding of Gaza, these are really significant. And I hope that we will see, as we move forward, the rebuilding of trust between the Labour Party and all communities across the country.
OK, Bob, let's go back to crime. You mentioned it earlier. Keir Starmer said he wants to intervene early to prevent young people from committing knife crime. The Conservatives have long blamed Sadiq Khan for the rise in knife crime, the explosion in knife crime in London. What difference can a Labour government make, do you think?
I think what it can do at a national level is take a much more holistic approach to the whole of crime and the criminal justice system. I continue to be critical of Sadiq for his record in relation to policing in London, but there's a broader picture here, and where Keir Starmer, I must say, is right to identify the need for early intervention, because the biggest problem we have is young people getting sucked into crime early on and then into a cycle of reoffending. One of the biggest issues we have in this country is that we, ironically, very expensively imprison more people than our Western European counterparts and have higher levels of reoffending and therefore more crime again. And the thing I was actually very pleased, and full credit to the new government for doing, was the exceptionally good appointment of James Timpson, of Timpson's the shoe firm, former chairman of the Prison Reform Trust as prisons minister. I think we need to break that cycle of looking at this piecemeal policing, prisons, probation as sort of an afterthought. We've got to look at this all in one piece. And if that can be done, that will be something that ought to have support from all parties, because that's the best way of reducing crime.
Sarah, briefly, women's safety, a key issue in the capital. What do you want to see the government do about it?
And Liberal Democrats have always been calling for a return to neighbourhood policing. It's about that deterrence. It's about that presence on the ground, visible presence. We need a new police station in Richmond Town Centre, just so that people know where they can go and where they can report crime.
Police stations. Seema, in the next 6 months, what's going to change when it comes to police and crime?
The most important thing is the rebuilding of our neighbourhood policing. We know that we've had a 75% drop in PCSOs in London since 2010, and that's had an extraordinary impact.
To meet his commitments and now his target.
He has recruited, but what will be really important is how central government is working with local government. But it isn't just that. It's the neighbourhood policing guarantee, it's town centre patrols, and it's support for young people, those community hubs, those youth hubs that will make a difference in prevention and giving the support to those young people at risk of crime.
Bob, last word to you. You're standing down. You stood down after 18 years. We're very grateful to all the time you've given to this programme. Before we let you go, what are your thoughts about the future of London? What do you want to see now for the future of London?
London remains the greatest city on earth. I'm proud to be a Londoner. I've been proud to have been a London MP and before that an Assembly member and a councillor. What I want is London to be taken seriously by national government, because it isn't always. And if London succeeds, the country succeeds. And I hope that will be taken notice of at all levels, economically, socially, and also our cultural sector, which has not been well served in the past.
Thank you so much. We wish you well for the future. That is all we have time for this week. My thanks to Seema, to Bob, to Sarah and to Tony, and thanks to you for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Way to follow UEFA Euro 2024. Download the BBC Sport app this summer.